Politics still going strong this morning here on Sunrise on the Hill.
Yeah, it's going strong the day after Election Day. I'm Hillary Howard, very happy to have you with us here this morning.
So, the day after the election, the results are in. Some votes still being counted, but we know how things shook out. From Democratic strongholds like California, even to swing states like Pennsylvania and Georgia, last night was a good night if you are a Democrat.
And it was no different here at home. Democrats dominated the ballot in Virginia. Abigail Spanberger defeated Republican Winsome Earl-Sears handily. She'll be the first woman to serve as governor of the Commonwealth. Meantime, Spanberger got about 57% of the vote. Over 1 million ballots have been counted so far.
Another history maker is Ghazala Hashmi. She's going to be the first Muslim woman elected to statewide office in the country. She beat Republican John Reed with 55% of support to Reed's 44%.
And the Commonwealth elected Democrat Jay Jones as the state's next attorney general, ousting incumbent Jason Miyares. Jones got a little more than 53% of the vote against the backdrop of a major texting controversy that took over the campaign's final month.
All right, we are joined by the Hill's national political reporter, Julia Manchester, this morning. Congratulations, Julia. You made it through Election Day. We know you were following all these races very closely in the Commonwealth this morning. Obviously, history for Abigail Spanberger, Ghazala Hashmi. We have got to start with Jay Jones. What did you make of that margin and victory despite that text message controversy?
Well, I think margin is really the key word there, Corey. I mean, we always knew that this was going to be closer than the governor's race and the lieutenant governor's race, but the margin by which Jay Jones won by speaks volumes. I think it shows that, Democrats are willing to, put aside maybe, their disgust and discontent with those text messages to essentially, put that aside to essentially vote for Jay Jones. And, clearly this swayed independents as well. Jay Jones was actually outperforming Vice President Kamala Harris in key Democratic strongholds, including Loudoun County. It seems that his message, his very consistent message of campaigning against Trump and what a Jason Miyares attorney general, another term for Jason Miyares as attorney general, would look like during a second Trump administration. That seemed to very much work for him. That same message also, I think, worked for Abigail Spanberger and to an extent Ghazala Hashmi, in that they focused on the Trump administration, how the second Trump administration has had what critics would say are dire impacts on much of the population in Virginia, particularly the population that works in the federal workforce.
Julia, about 13% of the votes came from mail-in ballots. Do you think that had a significant impact since that was before the whole scandal thing, or did it not matter?
I think it's hard to say at this point. It could have. I think the scandal broke in very, very early October. I think at that point, early voting, mail-in voting had been, 2 weeks before then? So part of it could be, but I think there was enough time where a large portion of that share could have come after the mail-in voting period, or after the scandal broke, excuse me.
Julia, we saw a Truth Social post from the president sort of explaining why he felt Republicans performed so poorly last night. He said Trump wasn't on the ballot and shutdown were the two reasons that Republicans lost elections tonight, according to pollsters. We mentioned, of course, the federal workforce here in Virginia being so heavily impacted by DOGE cuts, by the shutdown. Ultimately, what lies ahead for a governor to be Spanberger? How does she sort of deal with what's going on when it comes to things going on the Hill?
Well, look, it's going to be, I think, an interesting period for, a Governor Spanberger. She's going to be working with a Washington that is controlled by Republicans for the next year or so. So, there's obviously close ties between Virginia and Washington, D.C. due to that federal workforce. So I think that's a relationship we'll certainly be previewing. A lot of us are talking about the relationship between President Trump and New York City mayoral-elect Zoran Mamdani. However, it'll be interesting to see how Abigail Spanberger works with Donald Trump. Unlike Mamdani, Spanberger is a centrist. She's moderate. She has a history of reaching across the aisle and working with Republicans. But we know that President Trump has, gone into probably bluer states than Virginia, like Illinois, for example, Oregon, to deploy the National Guard. The question is, how would a Spanberger react to that? She says she will push back against it, but there's probably, some degree of relief, ironically, or relief in many ways, that Jay Jones is the Attorney General. We know that the Attorney General is separate from the governor's office in Virginia, or the executive branch. So if Jason Miyares were, to win another term as Attorney General, that would complicate matters for Abigail Spanberger. Of course, there's still the question of, the scandal isn't going away for Jay Jones. I mean, this is going to live on with him forever. She's going to be tied to it just because of their proximity to each other. So there's the question of how she deals with that as well.
Julia, as we start to dive through all of the numbers and all of the statisticians make all of these demographic conclusions about who voted and why, there was one really interesting thing in Prince William County, the city of Manassas Park. 17,000 people with a 46% Latino plurality population. Harris won it by 20. Spanberger won it by 41.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's going to come down to those margins, not only in Virginia, but also in New Jersey. Look, I think Republicans were expecting to at least underperform in a number of these states and cities where we saw elections last night. But I think it's really the margins that are the topic of conversation tonight, not only among those demographics like Hispanic and Latino voters, but also among suburban voters as well. Various demographics, I think that President Trump may have done better with last election. Within a year, they flipped and seem to be favoring Democrats. That's very notable.
About 30 seconds left, Julia. I want to ask you, we have Spanberger's big win in Virginia. She's a centrist. You have Zohran Mamdani's big win in New York City. He's a Democratic socialist. It was a good night for Democrats, but ultimately the debate over where the party goes from here really just heats up, right? It just ratchets up because you've got two very competing ideologies wanting to go in a direction that leads to victory.
Yeah, I mean, I could see it certainly ratcheting up, but maybe I could also see Democrats coming to the conclusion that there are two paths, that there are very different parts of this country, different populations where one message might perform better than the other. Abigail Spanberger has said repeatedly she probably could not be elected in New York City. I'm sure Zohran Mamdani knows that he probably could not win a statewide election in Virginia. So the question is, do Democrats realize there are two paths here, or do they sort of duke it out in this progressives versus centrist debate? I think next year's primaries could give us more reading of that.
Yeah, and to that point, I was listening to some Democrats saying maybe the tent can't be big enough. Julia, thanks so much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Of course, you can find Julia's reporting at thehill.com.